Welcome, I'm Al Vanderberg and this is Shannon Faulkner and this is West Michigan Issues and Impact, and today we are excited to be hosting Andy Fias, who is the section commander of the West Michigan Enforcement Team. Andy, welcome.
Thank you.
And
thanks for having me.
Today we would like to start out by just telling us a little bit about Andy Fias and a little bit of your history and how you came to do such a unique job like commanding drug enforcement team.
Well, I started with the state police in 1994. I have almost 22 years in with the state police. Started in Newaygo County at the Newaygo Post, which is now a detachment of the Hart Post after the reorganization a couple years back. Got into narcotics work in 2000, so 6 years in the department. And I've been kind of in and out of narcotics doing investigations for the last 15 years. I had some time on the team in Grand Rapids, the Metropolitan Enforcement Team. I came to WEMET in 2007. I was assigned as the team leader of the Muskegon team for a little over 6 years, and I became the section commander in early parts of 2014. I'm on my second year there, and that's how I kind of got to that position, but now I am the section commander working out of the Fillmore office.
So you use the acronym WEMET. Tell us what it stands for, what it means, why there's this collaboration, and then maybe elaborate on some of the things that you see in West Michigan as part of WEMET in the drug enforcement.
Sure, and Al mentioned it in the intro. It's the West Michigan Enforcement Team, WEMET. It's a multi-jurisdictional, state-run narcotics task force with a primary focus on narcotics, but it's made up of agencies in 3 counties, Muskegon, Ottawa, and Allegan, and we have participation from the state police, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, the Grand Haven Department of Public Safety, Holland Department of Public Safety, Allegan County Sheriff's Department, Muskegon County Sheriff's Department, Muskegon City Police, Norton Shores Police, and kind of a part-time guy from Allegan City Police.
Wow.
I think there's, as of today, we're about 30 strong. We have 2 administrative support personnel, and we have a National Guard analyst assigned to the team that's been there about 7 months. That's a great addition in a cooperation effort with the National Guard Counter-Drug Agency. Primarily, WEMET focuses on illegal drug trafficking. We try to focus on mid to upper level drug traffickers. And our big problems that we're seeing right now in West Michigan, we have an incredible heroin problem, which has kind of risen from...
Wait, wasn't that like a 1960s thing, New York City?
It was huge
Miami.
in the 60s and 70s, and it has kind of had a resurgence here in the last 2 years, in part to our prescription drug problem in the country, not just Michigan, but Michigan has a pretty significant prescription drug abuse problem, and a lot of those drugs are just like heroin, they're opiate based, and when you stop getting those prescription drugs, a likely turn is to heroin. And we're seeing a significant problem in Muskegon County, which pushes into kind of northern Ottawa County, and we're starting to see it in Allegan County. Allegan County has primarily been a methamphetamine county, and a manufacturing of methamphetamine, the kind of the small, they call them one-pot meth labs. You can cook methamphetamine in a 2-liter pop bottle. But we also do see a good influx of still some Mexican methamphetamine, a little bit better quality methamphetamine than what the one-pot cooks are getting. And then we still see a lot of crack cocaine and cocaine in all 3 counties.
My perception would have been that heroin's expensive. Is that not the case, or has it changed? Or?
Well, all drugs are kind of supply and demand. If there's a huge demand for it, that price gets kind of dropped down. Heroin, you can buy a pack of heroin, which is about 0.2 grams, would be kind of the single dose unit, and that's about $20. Where a similar opiate prescription pill is going to sell for $1 for however many milligrams that pill might be. So a 60 milligram OxyContin is going to be $60 on the street. You can get that 20-pack of heroin and get a much better high off of that heroin than you would off the OxyContin.
Okay. Wow. Who would have thought that the economic laws would apply to drugs as well?
They do, yeah, much like everything else.
All right.
Several years ago, voters in Michigan passed the use of marijuana, constitutional amendment, for medicinal purposes. How has that impacted WEMET? Well, on its face, it hasn't impacted us at all because it's legal. So if
if you have your medical marijuana card, to possess and grow marijuana. I guess in the area it does impact us, as we have seen through our compliance checks, if you want to call them that. If we get a tip that someone's growing marijuana or maybe in possession of a quantity of marijuana, we might go out and talk to that person, and if they produce a patient card or a caregiver card, we then go into kind of compliance check mode, make sure if they're a patient that they only have 12 plants and 2.5 ounces. Oftentimes, we do see a abuse of that act, of that allowable amount, and we will take the illegal marijuana from that person. So if they're allowed 12 plants and they had 50, we're going to leave them with their legal 12 plants, but we're going to take the other additional plants with math, 38 plants we would take in that example. Same with quantities of usable marijuana. A patient's only allowed 2.5 ounces of usable marijuana, which is a pretty good size, a couple softballs size worth of marijuana. But if they had a pound on them, we would take everything up and above that 2.5 ounces that they're legally allowed. So we're dealing with the illegal amounts of the marijuana.
Okay.
So this marijuana law, the medical marijuana law, conflicts with federal law. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It
so
does.
How do you work in that environment? How do you operate in this conflicted world?
It sounds conflicted on its face, but it's really actually kind of easy to get around, because the feds still, marijuana is completely illegal federally. But fortunately, the federal prosecutors have thresholds that you have to meet before they're going to prosecute a marijuana case. And I don't really want to get into what those thresholds are and kind of educate people, but they're substantially higher than what our medical marijuana patients are allowed to possess. For instance, we would have to be talking about well over 100 plants before someone would be prosecuted federally. And they're only allowed, if they're a caregiver with 5 patients and a patient themselves, they can have 72 plants. And kind of what we do is the feds want to, they recognize our medical marijuana laws, and they don't necessarily approve of them, but they're not going to mess with somebody who's in compliance. So they would want them to be double or triple what they're allowed if they were a caregiver with 72 plants. They're going to want to see a significant amount of overage before they would get involved. They do get involved. We have had, since 2008, we have had some fairly significant marijuana grow operations that were kind of under the guidelines of the Medical Marijuana Act, but way above what they were allowed, and the feds have stepped in and prosecuted those cases.
The idea of legalizing marijuana in Michigan could be on the ballot soon, I guess, for recreational use, since we already have it for medicinal use. How would this get on the ballot, and what is the likelihood, in your opinion, that it will actually get there?
Well, there's 2 initiatives that have been approved for signatures, and what they have to do is they have to get approved by the I'm drawing a blank on
Election Commission.
The Election Commission has to approve the 2 initiatives, and then they need to get signatures through a petition process to get it on the ballot, much like they did with our Medical Marijuana Act. That was a constitutional amendment. And they have to collect over 250,000 signatures, and they have to be verifiable signatures. They can't go out and just have someone sign Fred Flintstone, Barney Rubble. Those are going to get thrown out. They have to be verifiable signatures of registered voters, and again, 250,000 of those signatures have to be obtained. Once they were approved, which I think they got approval back midsummer, they have 180 days to then get those signatures and present them to the Election Commission. And they're coming up on that deadline. I don't know where they're at with getting their signatures. I have seen them a couple times in front of the Muskegon County Courthouse. I don't get to the Ottawa County Courthouses very often, but I've heard they're there. They had a very large booth at the Art Prize.
Right.
If you made it to Art Prize, they were collecting signatures there. But again, they might get hundreds of thousands of signatures, but they're going to review them, and a lot of them could get thrown out. Duplicates will get thrown out. So at the end of the day, if they have their 250,000 signatures, it will make it to the November 2016 ballot. Now, with the 2 initiatives, they're kind of competing for that at that point. They could both get on the ballot for 2016, and then at the end of the election, whichever one draws the most votes, if they were both to pass, the initiative that would kind of win that election would be the one with the most votes at the end of November.
Okay.
Quite a process. So we don't know where they are at in that process.
We don't know
correct?
where they're at. I know, like I said, we see them out
Okay.
getting those signatures. So the likelihood of it being on the ballot, I really couldn't speculate whether it's going to make it there or not. I do know, I mean, if you compare it to our Medical Marijuana Act, we also did that during a presidential election year, and they were fairly successful in getting all those signatures and getting it on the ballot back in 2008.
Right.
People are in tune with things, with voting that year.
And I
Yeah.
think one of a winning proposal would have to have more than 50%, correct?
That's correct.
So
Right.
simply if a vote had a plurality, then that wouldn't make it unless you would, okay. Well, that makes
Correct.
sense.
And that's kind of, if you followed what happened in Ohio, they just recently defeated recreational use marijuana down there, I think a month ago. Or it's been really real recent. And they did not get past that number of votes needed to pass it. It did pass by a very small margin, but it wasn't over the margin that was needed to
Okay, so it
enact
has to be a certain margin.
Right.
And having two proposals is really a rather a large handicap for those who would like to see it happen, because if you split the support, that might bode well for those who are opposed.
For sure. If you were for one and not the other, you might sign one and not the other. So
Right.
they're kind of battling with each other.
Right.
So you talked about it being placed before the voters in Ohio and turned down there. I know you don't want to speculate in Michigan whether or not it will pass, but have there been other states other than Ohio that has been placed before the voters and turned down?
We touched on Ohio, and they did beat it, kind of a grassroots effort, using social media, kind of got the word out that, that it's a different marijuana today than it was in years past. And then Florida defeated medical marijuana back in 2014. Okay. Same thing, they just flooded social media, Facebook, and just grassroots efforts defeated the medical marijuana proposals that they faced back in 2014.
So we wouldn't be the first state to actually have legal marijuana use if it was adopted. How many states so far have legalized it? I think I've heard that you've become rather an expert on this and might actually have an opinion on whether this is a good thing or not. But tell us about some of the other states and what their experience has been.
I'm very familiar with what's happening in Colorado. I went out to a conference after they legalized. But there's 3 other states, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and the District of Columbia, have all legalized recreational use marijuana. Colorado did so in 2012. They took all of 2013 to kind of get things in place, and then they rolled it out in 2014 was their first year of doing it. They have dispensaries out there, or the marijuana stores. And
I actually saw one. Visited my son who's in the military over spring break. I almost took a picture to send you, but I didn't.
I'm surprised you only saw one, because they're everywhere in Colorado, especially in the city of Denver. Everybody knows there's a McDonald's and a Starbucks on every corner, right?
Right.
I mean, you can't drive 2 miles without seeing
Right.
one or the other. In Colorado, there's 632 Starbucks and McDonald's in the entire state. There's 827 marijuana
Wow.
dispensaries in Colorado. So, I mean, and you compare it to drugstores, the drugstore number is even less. And I always argue, always say that you can't drive to a street corner without seeing a Rite Aid on one and a Walgreens on the other. They're competing on the same corner. And that number is even smaller in Colorado. The other thing that they've done out there in Colorado that has really kind of exploded, and we'll get into why it's exploded, 2 reasons it's exploded, but they've allowed edibles and medibles on the medical side.
Edibles and medibles.
Edibles and
Okay.
medibles. Same thing, just 2 different avenues that they're selling them on, because they do have a medical marijuana law out there as well.
So
But those-
explain that again, they allowing what?
They allow edible marijuana.
Okay.
All the candies, all the suckers,
Okay.
all the brownies, all the cookies. Basically, you can take anything and put marijuana THC in it. The psychoactive ingredient in marijuana is THC, delta-9 THC. But they can extract that THC from the plant. So where you're used to seeing, like on High Times magazine, they show the pictures of the really good marijuana flower, the bud.
Did you catch that in the last edition?
Ha,
Oh, okay.
If you look at High Times online, and not a lot of people do, but they show a lot of marijuana flower pictures. But what's new in this age is the extracts, the marijuana butters, the shatter, and then all the edibles that are made from the extracts. The edibles of today aren't, when I was in high school, someone talked about having marijuana brownies. Well, they were brownies with plant material, and green, you'd bite into it, and there would be green plant material in that. And the photos you would see would be marijuana with green plant material. What they've developed now is an extraction process where they get oil out of the marijuana. And there's no longer just the flower. You can take any part of that plant, the root, the stems, the stalk, everything that they used to burn back in the old days, they're now stuffing in a pipe, metal pipe or PVC or plastic pipe, and then they're putting a solvent through there. Butane seems to be the most popular here in West Michigan, because we are seeing this in West Michigan even though it's completely illegal. And they're pumping butane through these things with a filter on the other end, and what they're left with is a Pyrex bowl full of butane and very high quality THC. And then what they do, they got to get rid of the butane. So how would you get rid of that butane?
Burn it.
You would cook it off.
Cook it off.
Oh.
So you put your Pyrex, your mom's Pyrex bowl on the stove, and you crank the stove
Oh
up,
my goodness.
and you bring it to a boil, and the butane will dissipate.
Okay.
Problem is
Yeah,
butane
right.
is highly flammable. It's used in cigarette lighters,
That's
so
dangerous.
it's very highly flammable. There have been several explosions in Colorado from butane hash oil labs. But what you wind up with at the end of that is some resin in the bottom that you can turn into butter, shatter. There's several different products, but you can also put it into your edible, and your edible is going to taste, an edible gummy bear with THC in it is going to taste exactly the same as the gummy bear you might buy at the corner store.
So instead of like vanilla, you use THC, huh?
Right, you add your THC. The other problem
Boy.
with that is the quality of the THC in the extractions is 100 times, sometimes 100 times stronger than the marijuana if you were just smoking that flower or that bud.
Any stories of children getting their hands on gummy bears or suckers?
There are some of the things that's happened in Colorado. They've seen school suspensions go up. They've seen walk-in emergency room accidental exposures to THC-laced food. Those things are all on the rise. The unfortunate thing is they've only had 1 year of data. And they found out that in prior years they were doing a horrible job of getting that data and tracking that data. So 2015 numbers are going to be something to look at as to where those numbers
More
are
of a benchmark.
considerably right, because they're going to be, I mean, you could assume they're probably going to be better than the 2014 numbers. But they have seen increased school suspensions, the exposures in the ERs. They had 32 explosions from BHO labs. We just had one a week and a half ago in Rockford, Michigan, apartment complex, as a matter of fact, and it blew up not only the apartment where it was being done, but neighboring apartments were damaged.
And that's what
There
they
was a
were
fire.
doing?
They were extracting butane hash oil in that apartment.
So the much higher concentration in some of these oils, does that create any kind of threat to life for adults that ingest these things, or what's that impact?
Well, there's still kind of a lot of data that needs to be collected, because the data we're collecting on how it affects our youth, even our adult age people that are marijuana users, all those studies are on kind of old school marijuana that was maybe 12% THC. We're not seeing 12% THC anywhere in this country anymore, except for some of the marijuana that's still kind of getting smuggled across from Mexico. We still see that lower grade Mexican marijuana. But we've gotten so good at growing it here in the United States, and even here in Michigan, that we're seeing THC levels in the plant upwards of 25, 28, 30% THC, compared to 1980 THC at 1.5% THC of our marijuana plant. When you start talking about the extractable marijuana resins, the butter, the hash oil, and even the edibles, we're talking THC levels 80 to 90%, compared to 28% in a plant smoked. So there's going to be differences in the quality. I mean, 80 to 90% THC is hallucinogenic THC. There's one good example out of Colorado. A gentleman ate what's called a Chiba Chew out there, and it looks like a Hershey's Nugget.
Chew.
Are you familiar with the Hershey Nugget, the smaller candy bar Hershey's?
Yeah.
There was a Hershey's Nugget laced with THC. They call them Chiba Chews because they can't call them Hershey Nuggets. Be a infringement on Hershey's name, I would guess. There'd probably be some lawsuits.
Trademarks there.
But the gentleman, his wife calls 911, and those Chiba Chews, there's 10 dosage units in that small candy bar. You're supposed to eat 1/10 of it. He ate the entire thing. His wife called, said that her husband was hallucinating, wanted her to kill him, because of the demons, because of the things he was seeing. And as they're listening on 911 trying to get law enforcement response, the husband gets a hold of a gun and kills his wife while she's talking to 911 on the phone. And then the other big case of a kind of an overdose, if you want to call it that. A gentleman at one of the universities in Colorado, he was visiting. He bought a cookie that was, again, 10 dosage units, a regular sized cookie. Took the one dose, wasn't feeling anything. Took the other dose, wasn't feeling anything. Before he knew it, the whole cookie's gone, and he leapt off, I think, a 5th story balcony at one of the colleges and fell to his death.
Oh my.
Both of those gentlemen, THC, high levels of THC in their system. So just a couple examples of kind of what's going on out there that the public, really needs to know about things that are happening.
Wow. If there is a proposal to legalize marijuana that gets onto the ballot, is any talk of any kind of organized opposition for that, or from any communities out there, whether it be law enforcement or other groups?
Yeah, like I talked about with the limited kind of information that's coming out of Colorado and the other affected states, it's hard to kind of decide what we're going to do as a law enforcement community. But we are getting out. I mean, I've been out several times, as you know, speaking to whoever will listen about kind of what has happened in Colorado, just to educate voters about what today's marijuana looks like compared to the marijuana that most of our voting public
This isn't
is
your grandfather's
used to.
marijuana,
Exactly.
right? Okay.
And then when you talk to people, I went out to Colorado, as I mentioned earlier, and in talking to some of the people that you ran into at the conference, one of the huge problems they had is they kind of sat back and let it all kind of happen. They didn't get involved, but they found out that people went out and voted because it was just marijuana, and they were thinking of marijuana from the 70s and 80s, which, as we mentioned earlier, 1.5% THC in those marijuana joints compared to 28 to 30% THC in today's marijuana joints. And that's where you don't even touch the edibles. I mean, we've got to get the word out about these edibles and how much concentrated THC there really is in the edibles. There's probably going to be some sort of organized opposition. The problem is the marijuana lobby. There'll be some big name marijuana lobbyists that are going to get involved if the signatures do get obtained and it does get on the ballot. And in Colorado, the pro-marijuana lobby outspent the opposition $44 to every dollar. So with that kind of difference in spending, you're going to get a one-sided message. But again, we talked about Ohio and Florida both defeating it with kind of a grassroots, inexpensive attack on it.
I think if there's a way to galvanize all the police departments in the state, I know that there have been many successful efforts that have stopped reductions in state revenue sharing money and the kinds of things that would have meant firefighter and police officer jobs. Do you find that maybe part of your job is to convince those in law enforcement because so that there can be that united front? Because it almost seems like we don't hear much about this. Or
Sure, I understand what you're saying. And I think the problem is much like in Colorado, it's hard for law enforcement. We can't take a position. I mean, I can't go out to the public and say, here's what's on the ballot and here's how you should vote or not vote. But I think when you educate people as to what it could look like, and Colorado is a great example of what it could look like. I was at a meeting last week and they had the director of Colorado's Chamber of Commerce. They call it something different out there. But the one thing she said is that Colorado is now seeing issues with drawing business to Colorado. No one wants to come there because of their marijuana laws.
Right.
And the other thing that the jury's kind of still out on is they have some very large Department of Defense contracts in Colorado, and there's some back and forth conversations on whether the Department of Defense wants to get involved in renewing those contracts because of how they've loosened up marijuana laws in Colorado. So those are all things that the voting public in Michigan need to consider when they step in there and vote.
is there any sense that those trying to collect signatures are being influenced by out-of-state interests? I know that allegation was made with the medical marijuana. It was made with initiatives as diverse as the dove hunting one. Do you sense that this is homegrown from people within the state, or heavily influenced from without of the state?
Well, you have some homegrown, there's Michigan Legalize, who's behind one of the ballot initiatives, but they are all connected to the national organizations that are pro-marijuana, and there's definitely some money being funneled to the state of Michigan to try to get this to pass. So, I mean, like I said, 44 to 1, there's some estimations that it could be as large as 150 to 1 here in Michigan when it hits the
And what are their
media.
messages? What are their, I mean, what's, aside from it's just marijuana, I mean, are there messages about, you know, economics, that this is good for our economy or things like that? I mean, what kinds of things do our oppositions have to?
It'll be very
against?
similar to Colorado. I mean, they generate money for the schools out there.
Okay.
But incidentally, they fell short in 2014. They are, the first 40 million in Colorado is supposed to go to the school program. I think the acronym is BEST.
Ironic.
I apologize, I don't know what it stands for. BEST. But they only generated, they fell about 50% short of their projected 40 million. And they actually fell short across the board. They projected well over 130 million. And when at the end of the 2014 calendar year, they had only taken in about 65 million.
So they're thinking of tax revenue for the state.
Right. There's
Gotcha.
they're definitely going to come at you with a message that, for instance, maybe we're going to fix our potholes with legalized pot. You may see that message because we still don't have.
Isn't that clever?
We still don't have a roads bill. I don't think that's passed. So,
Potholes.
I give them, yeah,
Indeed.
give them credit for creativity.
but you're also going to see, you know, funding for health and human services, law enforcement, and the schools. You're going to see a taxation of this, and they do tax it quite high in Colorado. I think our proposed taxes are smaller, but there's a 25-ish% tax on top of their state tax out in Colorado for the legalized recreational marijuana. Medical marijuana is still only taxed at 2.9%, I think is their state rate.
What is the one message that voters need to understand?
I think the big message is it's not old school marijuana that we're talking about. We're talking about marijuana with incredibly greater addictive qualities, hallucinogenic qualities. Our youth use is we are already above national averages here in Michigan. Colorado and Washington State Colorado is 10% above national averages for 12 and up youth usage of marijuana. Washington is about 8% higher than the national average. Michigan is about 4 points already higher than the national average, and when you make it legal for recreational use or medical marijuana use, what that does is it kind of desensitizes the harm, the perception of harm, and when that perception of harm goes down, use is going to go up because it's not as bad for me as I thought it would be. But it's 1 in 6 12 to 18-year-olds that use marijuana become addicted, 1 in 6. And then 1 in 10 adults can become addicted to marijuana.
So it's not your mom's marijuana.
It is
Not your
not.
mom's
And the
marijuana.
edibles and the medibles and those extracts of marijuana are high-quality THC, which could be very harmful.
Well, Andy, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
This has been another edition of West Michigan Issues and Impact. Join us back next month. Thank you.